All righty.
Awesome. Good. Glad to be here.
For those who don't know me, my name is Kevin May. I'm the head of school here at Hilltop. And we're thrilled to have you here for the second of our 3 speakers. Tonight, I'm quite thrilled to introduce you to Sarah Larry Nannery. Using her personal experience living as an adult with autism spectrum disorder, Sarah, together with her husband Larry, will provide us with an insight for anyone on the spectrum or living with someone on the spectrum who's looking to successfully navigate work, life, and life. When Sarah got her first job at a small nonprofit, she thought she knew exactly what it would take to advance. But she soon realized that even with hard work and conscientiousness, she was missing key meanings and messages embedded in her colleagues' everyday requests, feedback, and praise. With help from her neurotypical partner, she rose to director of development at one of the world's largest nonprofits. Together, they have tackled challenges in how Sarah navigates personal and professional relationships, how they navigate marriage and parenthood. We all need tips on that. All of which are differently challenging for someone with ASD. In her book, What to Say Next, Sarah breaks down everyday situations, explaining not only how to understand the goals of others, but also how to frame your own. Larry adds his thoughts from a neurotypical perspective, sharing what was going on in his brain and how he learned to listen and enlighten while supporting Sarah's voice. Tonight, we're fortunate to have them both here with us to share some of their insights. So please give a round of applause and help me welcome the Nannerys.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll just do a quick intro as well. I'm currently the director of development for Autism Initiatives at Drexel University. So we have lots of amazing things happening around autism at Drexel as well. And
me, outside of being a wonderful stay-at-home dad, I am still a reformed technologist, having 30 years of computer teaching in my life, and I'm doing coaching for those in the spectrum because my experiences with Sarah and our children have informed me that the world that I see is not quite the world that other people see.
Yeah. And so obviously we're a neurodivergent couple. I'm autistic, and I didn't realize that. I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 31, so just a couple of years ago. And we'll talk a little bit about what that journey was like. And of course, as I mentioned, we've written a book. There's some back there if you would like to peruse, and we're happy to sign some. And I think with that, we'll go into the next slide. Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming. So as I mentioned, I grew up undiagnosed. It's not happening as much as it used to, but especially women and girls, we tend to go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, especially my age group. That's a picture of me when I was like 5, and I don't know if you can see like the triangles that I was drawing in rows. Currently I'm working on squares, and my mom was just like, "This is beautiful artwork," and I'm looking at it like, "Oh, why am I making lines of triangles?" Lines of faces, so I sort of went under the radar. People just thought that I was shy or quiet. I didn't quite fit in with any social groups. I could just not get any groove going. I was bullied a lot. And then what really got me through most of my school years was marching band, because I found a niche that I fit into. I fit in with the band geeks. And they accepted me and my quirks, and there were probably a few other quirky people along with those band geeks. So that got me through high school, that got me through college. I knew there was sort of something off. I knew that I was sort of processing things differently than other people, but I was able to find ways to make things work for me, and find niches to help me through. It wasn't until parenthood, really, that we realized that there was something else going on and that I needed more help than Larry was able to give me. When I came out of school, I was very lucky to run into Larry. We can go to the next slide.
It's okay, go to the next slide, but there are other pictures she didn't show. She used to have hair down to here. I've seen it in her high school day. It was purple.
Yeah.
Like you did go through a whole renaissance as you tried to find a voice externally, as you did not have a voice internally.
Yeah, I did Dungeons and Dragons. I was very, very nerdy tomboy type of person trying to find it, because I didn't really fit in with social norms. So you sort of find your own way. And it got pretty difficult for me. Thank God I had Larry. As I was coming out of the school environment where I had found my niche. And with school, you have the social element and then you have the academics, and you can sort of keep them separate in school. You have like team projects, but you could get by without really getting into teamwork too much if people were not doing what they were supposed to be doing and you end up doing all the work anyway. But when you get to the world of work, next slide, the social realm and the technical realm or the academic realm merge, and suddenly your part of your work is being social, is going to lunch with a coworker, is navigating all of these social relationships along with all of your technical pieces that you have to do for work. You can't get by as well just doing your work. You have to be conscious of the social structure around your workplace, which is where I was really struggling and where a lot of our early interactions came in.
So to give you a break for a second, Sarah, I met her at Starbucks, New York City, Penn Station. And this very nice introverted girl like this during a snowstorm and 50 people in line to get coffee and to survive Penn Station. Turned into a 3-hour conversation that turned into a Yahoo instant message interaction, which ultimately turned into, well, Sarah, you can either go back home to a small town or you can take a shot and come to New York City. And I'm not sure if your mom was fully on board with the idea, but y'all can guess which one she chose.
Yes. We go to the next slide. It shows Larry, obviously. Yeah. And so those early years, we didn't know that I was autistic. We knew that I was sort of fresh to the work world. And so I think a lot of what you were picking up on early, you sort of wrote off as like, oh, she's young, she's like new to the work world.
And experience.
And so you were helping me through a lot of those early bumps.
Yeah, so I was at Barnes & Noble, which was a wonderful job for where you were coming out of school and just trying to figure out yourself.
I love books.
But then you traded in Barnes & Noble for a flyer at a place called Make Meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very interesting experience because it was a small upstart. You go in, you create these crafts, right?
Yeah.
And you thought, well, gee, I got to do some art stuff and, still trying to find myself. But very quickly, you were not the popular kid with everybody.
Right. It was more of a retail situation, sales, I was not ready for that.
And then you got laid off.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting experience to see Sarah not succeed when, you're very successful in high school, valedictorian, very successful in pursuing your master's degree. And obviously Barnes & Noble was not a career for you, but to go through some of that turbulence, I think now we can look back on and say this was a great experience, and it helped really to enlighten me of, okay, no, it's not that you're just uncomfortable in trying to build social situations. It's they don't make sense to you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be successful if the situation warrants you to be friendly. Which, fast forward real quick, what is your current job and what is it you're trying to do?
Well, in fundraising, that's sort of what my job is now, is to make connections with people. And it's been a really interesting journey because now that it's my job, I have steps that I follow. I know how to build a relationship with somebody. I know how to talk about my content area where I have expertise.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
but there is this chasm between where you started and,
Yeah.
and where we are, find ourselves now.
Yeah. I don't as much anymore have to like work a room like I used to have to do. That's tough for me to do. It's much easier to do one-on-ones with people, which is where I found my niche. So Larry was offering me a lot of coaching and mentoring support as I was coming out of the sort of school life and into adulting. You can go to the next slide. So, so for me, adulting was a lot of executive functioning, which I struggle immensely with, and navigating gray areas, because in school it's much easier to be like, well, it's right or it's wrong, you know, and I think in a very black and white way, but life is not black or white. Life is all about gray areas, and the best example that I've found for illustrating this is traffic light. So you've got red light means stop, you've got green light means go, right? Easy. What does the yellow light mean? Okay, like,
It used to be go faster for her.
no, in the driver's ed, it goes slow. Yellow means go slow. Okay, great, I got it. I'm learning how to drive. Who here, don't raise your hand, please. I don't want you incriminating yourself. When you see the yellow light, you hit the gas. Like, everybody around me is speeding through these yellow lights. And I'm like, what is going on? So this is adulthood for me. You know, I sort of have rules that I thought I was following, but nobody else is following my rules. And they're not really rules to begin with. There's so many contextual clues that you have to consider when you're making that split-second decision. Do I speed through the yellow light or do I stop? Right? How fast are you going? What's the speed limit? Who's behind you? Who's in front of you? All of which I do manually every time I'm at a traffic light. So driving is like, but it gets easier the more that I do it. And it's sort of a nice parable to the rest of my life where I'm always dealing with yellow lights everywhere in social interactions. And it's an interesting manual process to go through.
So I want to talk about the yellow light and the way of a compromise. One of the things that well before Sarah's diagnosis and such, when we were coming together and forming our family, we said, we don't want to compromise. We don't want to live where each of us gets something and each of us lose something, which I think is akin to the yellow light. It's this murky area of life choices. And what we did very early on was we said, if one person is passionate about a restaurant or a movie or an activity that we want to do, and the other is indifferent, well, then let's go and support that the spouse's, the partner, excuse me, at the time, their ambition. And then the next time, maybe it goes back my way, maybe it doesn't. But I would rather be successful and happy living through what makes you find pleasure than each of us always ending up at the burger joint because I want Thai, I want Indian, I want this, I want that. And then we finally agree at a low level to, I mean, this isn't math, this is real life. And we want to enjoy ourselves. And as we talked about that with our friends and such, there's always this resonance of, oh, you mean I don't need to always win something? Like, no, you're winning by your partnership, and you don't need to have friction for every little social interaction. And now, obviously, I know just how painful the typical question, hey, honey, what would you like for dinner? Like you can little crackers. I don't care. And so from that, and as we progress through this conversation, progress through together, what we found is I know Sarah, and I can advocate and make choices that are beneficial for us, beneficial for you. I can tell if you've had a bad day, we're going to go have the Greek food with the lemon soup because you're going to enjoy that. You're going to enjoy oh, we're just having Chinese food because it tastes good. We haven't had it in a couple months. And
You're not doing yourself credit, Mr. Chef.
well,
No.
now, look, did you know going out is expensive? And I married someone who looks at a recipe book as calculus.
Oh,
And we went through a phase, everyone can get a box of groceries that come home and you can follow a menu.
pre-measured, that I can do, pre-measured, picture instructions, but it takes me an hour and the kids have to be out of the house.
So there's the trick. When it was us, or you would have been single for a while and living off, they would have been great for you. And you would have found good food at somewhat of a reasonable cost, still a lot cheaper than going out to dinner every day. But the effort it takes, and it's not just it takes you an hour, it's an hour with a cone of silence over your head.
Yep.
You cannot have a child or say, hey,
Right.
if we even had a kitty, I would be afraid to be like, go away, cats. I'm in the middle of measuring the pre-measured rice. But you know, the story here really is if you find what works for you and you're lucky enough to find a partner and what works for them, work towards those things rather than trying to work towards 50-50, because that's not life. Life is humanity, life is lived experiences, and go towards them and find the happiness and the successes from eating to entertainment choices.
Yeah, we like to say that, because often you think of marriage or partnership as like 50-50, right? Like we're sort of taught that it's supposed to be half and half, and we're not like that at all. You know, I never cook because it wouldn't work. So, you know, we like to think that we're both 100, like we're both putting 100% in, and it can be unbalanced sometimes, but it's our balance that we found that works.
And so I want to just remembering our audience that we're talking to, and as these conversations matriculate down to the teenagers that are connected to the hilltop, giving them some of those thoughts about what you're trying to accomplish versus how you're getting there. And don't keep score. Don't worry about if your way of accomplishing the food or the situation sounds different. As long as you are being successful, then you know what? You are successful. And stop worrying about how the contrast is with others in your peer group, and start worrying about how you're going to be the most that you can be.
Yeah. A couple other examples of this transition to adulting and sort of where Larry and I found some of our groups. I mentioned executive functioning. So when I was in school, I had a planner. I would write it down. You know, I have this homework due this time. I have a whole schedule. But when you get into like adult life, and especially with kids, that was a whole other thing. You start to there's too much to write everything down. I cannot have my house covered in Post-it notes. I cannot plan my everything. We would sit down every Friday, and we had a special weekend planner because I was able to get through the week. We had work time and we would do things, in a certain order, but the weekends were just heck for me because it was so unstructured. So we would sit down and we would sort of just a little bit of structure around, okay, Saturday morning, we might do this or this. We have to do this by Sunday evening so that I could have some format around my weekend time.
Well, and we did evolve that to also having the hour breakdowns.
Yeah.
I do distinctly remember.
That's from my brain.
Yes, well, it's like Sunday, I'm having my breakfast at the local Brooklyn diner from 9 to 10, so I enjoyed that. And then we could fill in some other things, and it's okay if we do IKEA Saturday at 1 p.m. or Sunday. Yeah.
Flexibility.
But there had to also be, what are those goals? And just to finish the tangents, I think it's very valuable. The next challenge was the value system. Well, how important is laundry getting done on that weekend versus going to IKEA versus going and seeing a movie? Well, all of us could say, well, laundry's got to be first, IKEA's got to be second, and movies, whatever. But what if you've had a long week and you need that decompression time? You know what? Laundry, maybe you do buy an extra pack of socks and you have some extra things. You need to find the value of what that entertainment is.
Yeah.
And that was something, for me, comes very natural. It's like I can roll with anything and I can speak from my feelings. Well, your feelings in your brain take some time. There's latency there.
Yeah.
And it took me quite a while to help you advocate for what that entertainment, that decompression
Right.
time would be.
Self-care.
Self-care, thank you.
Yeah, because it's, so prioritization is an issue for me because everything is important. Everything is equally important for me, and it just doesn't work like that. You can't give 100% to every single little thing. So I developed a system based on like schooling that needs come first and wants come later. But then what happens when you're worn out? You know, I would get to the point where I'd be going so long, doing all the stuff that needs to get done and not taking care of myself.
Work assignments.
Yeah.
They don't need to be 100%. And that is a great.
Yeah, perfectionism is a big one. We'll talk about that a little bit. Like, it's okay if it's 80%, like, it's good enough, you know, move on. Because it would take forever for me to do certain things. One other thing before we move on from the transition to adulthood is I don't have them as much anymore. But early on when we were first getting to know each other, I would have nonverbal episodes. And because it was a lot of emotions for me going through a really close romantic long-term relationship. I had a few, through high school, but like this was like the first.
Yeah, we're living together.
Yeah, living together and everything. So we would, and then I didn't know that I was autistic. I just thought I would clam up and I wouldn't be able to express. And so Larry figured out an interesting system for us because it was really difficult for him to understand. He's never experienced this before, where somebody would just not be able to talk for hours. So we got I love owls. So he found this little wooden owl and we put it on the bookshelf. And he told me, if you were ever get to that point where you just can't speak, you can't share with me for whatever reason, turn the owl around. And then I'll know, I'll look at it when I come in the door and I'll know you need space. Because eventually I would come out of it and I'd be able to express. But it was a really nice, I don't think we used it much, but even just
knowing
there, that it was there, yeah.
gave you some of it.
Yeah.
And it also, again, gave you some awareness that even if the owl is not turned, and then learning that the emotions and the brain aren't naturally connected as much as would be beneficial if they were, I could do contextual clues and have a conversation. Well, I had this 2-hour-long meeting and lunch, and well, okay, it's been tough. We're gonna put on some Star Trek and we're gonna figure out things. And again, wanting to get back to the audience that's here, being aware of your traits is huge. Whatever those traits are, whatever those things are that make you an individual, when you know thyself, you can then do something and you can engage with other people. And I think that, as much as anything else, has been a huge, experience for you in the past 10 years, 10
Yeah.
some odd years that you've been together.
Yeah, knowing, and not just knowing, but then being okay with doing things a little bit differently because right? Like it used to be that I would just try and push through a nonverbal episode. I'd be like, why can't I just, be like everybody else and just push through it? And it didn't work. So knowing that it might happen and then using a different tool or a different way to navigate that was really key. And I'm still learning how to do that. You can go to the next slide, which feeds into.
Are you going to wait till the end to take questions or should
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
On a lot of those.
just make it? I have a question from online. So Sorry.
By the way, hello, those online now and in the future in a recorded format. If we're not online, please at least tweet us and we will still want to answer the questions.
Yeah. Our contact info will be at the end. So, as I was learning all of these things about what it was to be an adult and to sort of navigate gray areas and like go slow or speed up at traffic lights, which I'm still working on. Learning that I don't cook well and that, you know, we can balance things together. There's a couple of really key things that my brain just does differently and will always do differently, no matter how much I try and learn new things. And that's these three things here. So, and it feeds into everything. So I'm not a big picture person. I'm a details person. And so I often will lose the purpose of what I'm trying to do, right? If I'm in a conversation or if I'm working on a project or something, I can go down a rabbit hole and I can get lost in the details and lose the bigger picture. And if I can just remember to pull back, and Larry helps with this so much, to that bigger picture, that's when I can I can take a breath and I can be like, okay, it doesn't matter if this leaf is exactly the right orientation, right? As long as there's a tree there and it looks like a tree, we're good, you know, like, so that helps a lot. This other thing we've talked about is this navigating gray areas versus black and white. I'm always going to look at the world as black or white. I have to manually make myself realize that there are gray areas and try to navigate them the best that I know how. That's where often in the beginning, when I was at work, I would have Larry on Instant Messenger and I would come back from some interaction in the hallway where somebody told a joke or something and I didn't quite work, or they said something in a way that with a tone that I wasn't sure. And I would go to my computer to be like, Larry, so-and-so just said whatever, what does it mean? And it was sort of like an SOS. We were doing that like 2 or 3 times a day. I was texting at work.
This is when I was in my technology years and, well, thankfully for me, no one batted an eye if I was on my phone and had 3 windows open. That was just part of my job and no one needed to know that it was my partner in one of those windows.
Yeah. So he would help me through a lot of that initial stuff. And then it got to the point where I was only doing it like once or twice a week. And now I don't remember the last time that I had the instant message you.
No, and so I'm trying really good to come back to our audience of, right, we are a partnership, we're married, we're together. The initial lessons of messaging back and forth, we transitioned at some point to a work journal. And for me, it was a parking lot situation of, Sarah, you're going to have X amount of interactions that you're going to need to understand and decompress from and figure out and then have a response to. And 90% of them, they can wait.
Right.
There is that 10%. And so this advice still doesn't have that 10% aspect, but for the 90%, having the work journal, writing things down, and then coming back to them, even with your own mind's eye, when you're not in that moment of social interaction, when the brain is already trying to not become a wallflower and you're trying to still participate, you would find success. And so I think as you're growing your career, and you've had the hits, right? You've had the experiences of making a meeting and
Yeah.
you know, that conversation with the CEO and by a water cooler for the 5th time. All right, you have a microprocess and you know how to get through that. But just reflecting on that journey and becoming aware of what those experiences are, parking on them as much as possible, and then finding someone to agnostically go through and say, what did the situation, what was its lead up, what was the actual outcome? How often were they just, well, it was just office banter and someone making a comment and it's a throwaway and they forgot about it 8 seconds after they told you about the leave.
Right.
And you're here thinking about it 2 days later.
8 weeks.
Like, no. You know, it's this value system. So again, it gets back to not every interaction is of the same merit.
Yeah.
But how do you tell that? Well, inflection. What do you mean? Like,
Yeah, what was the whole thing? Yeah, and then the other area where I'm always going to just think differently than other people is around generalization. I have found that it's very hard for me to learn like skill A applied to situation A, and then be able to take skill A and apply it to situation B. I can't do that. I have to be in situation B and learn skill B, which might be the same as skill A, but with a little tweak, right? I have to learn everything again in each new situation, and which can be exhausting. But now that I know that, there are some shortcuts I can use, knowing that I don't generalize the same way as everybody else does. Which is that's the same data on both of those pictures, but it looks very different, right? Because I'm categorizing things in a different way than everybody else might be. So we want to talk through a couple of, we can go to the next slide, and we're almost done, okay? We want to talk through a couple of examples of early workplace navigating office politics and that kind of thing that Larry helped me through, because it was, especially in the beginning and still even now, it's hard for me to navigate office culture. So like, for example, does the office culture encourage that we get approval before we do things, or do we encourage initiative, right? These are two very different ways of approaching your work, right? And we'll go to the next slide. And it's also hard for me to pick up, like Larry has said it, on implicit social cues. So like, that's that marrying of the social and the technical. If a coworker asks me to go to lunch, like I might say no because I'm not really into being social, but that might have been a situation where they wanted to talk about something related to work, or they wanted to ask me a question. So navigating, like, is it just an invitation to lunch because we want to be friendly, or is it an invitation to lunch because it might advance my career, right? I need to know the difference. And then it's also hard for me to read between the lines of explicit communication, right? When somebody at work says, can you get that to me by next week? They don't mean by 5 p.m. on Friday next week, which is what I think. Okay, next week is, I have the whole week. They mean by like Wednesday-ish. Right, which like, unless I have experience where I gave something to somebody on 5 p.m. on Friday, and they were like, what? Why is this late? Like, well, you said by next week. So those are some of the things that we've worked through. One in particular that was really interesting for me to learn was this concept of peers. So for me, going through school, my peer group were my classmates and people who were the same age as me. And I thought that would continue. I didn't even think about it in work. I thought of my peers as the people in the workplace who were the same age as me. But that's not necessarily the case when you're in a work situation. I advanced pretty quickly, and so I was at a different title level than a lot of my age peers. And so then I had to shift my thinking and realize that I was peers with people who were 10 or 20 years older than me in terms of title and the work that we were doing and the competency level that we had and the experience. So that took some shifting where I had to sort of change the way that I interacted with people who were older than me, not as putting myself in a subordinate role. Like I needed to manage across, and I needed them to listen to me and to do what we needed to do as a team, not look up to them like they were at the level of my manager, because we were on the same level.
what was your favorite line that Georgia told you when you just as a person development coordinator and then as the director of development? Fake it until you make it.
No. I couldn't do that. I mean, I did it, but
Which in this, I bring out to the list that this is the first time I've been from a mental health standpoint, the efforts that it took to transition from the education structure where your Sam's Montessori modeling, it is really driven by your age and your slow progressions. And now you're in the real world where fiscal stakes matter and people want things done. And if you have the competency and the quality to do it, then you're going to be elevated. But you have to be able to project that you can be successful in doing so. And there was a lot of friction there. Even today, that's still going to be at times a challenge, right?
Yeah, yeah, even now, it's hard for me to decipher who I'm supposed to be treating as a peer and who, that my default is always to be in a subordinate, like everybody else knows more than I do. But it's not true. Sometimes I have expertise that I need to bring to the table and I need to be confident enough in my role to be able to do that. One of the ways that I've built more confidence around that is learning the difference between in an office setting and a work setting, written, when it's okay to do an email and when you need to pick up the phone and talk to them or walk to wherever they are.
Sarah,
Different than with COVID.
put your email down and you have to go and talk to Scott.
Yeah. Because I would rather just do everything in email, and email is so much simpler and I can get all my thoughts out and it's clear, but apparently it's not as clear for a lot of other people because they're missing out on the nonverbal cues that they might be getting if we were talking in person, which I don't get as well. So for me, it's a lot harder to do in-person communication, but I found that it makes things run a lot smoother with other people because there's less miscommunication that can happen.
Also, emails, the longer your email,
Yeah.
the longer the one-sided narrative is going on. And if you're conveying an event and you're saying at 9 a.m. we're doing this, 11 a.m. we're doing this, 12, fabulous. That is, email can be as long as it's necessary to convey that information. But when you're interacting with a peer, or more to this point, when you're interacting with a superior who's wanting to engage with you, they don't want all of this. They want TLDR. And not only do they want that, but they want that in person because they're going to have 2 or 3 key questions based on what you say.
Right.
And then 8 minutes later, we're done and we're going on to the next topic in the conversation. So how you learned to prep yourself and have that information.
Right.
But not have too much of that information because, well, you got to get over to Scott's office by a certain time or else
Right.
you're not going to be there.
Right.
All of that, all of that in the galaxy is very interesting.
Yeah, I learned that if I was writing an email and if it went on for more than 3 sentences, it needed to be an in-person conversation or a phone conversation. So I would go ahead and write the email and then not send it and save it as a Word document and like read it a few times so I sort of have my narrative. Then I would go find the person and be able to have the conversation. And to Larry's point, I learned that when you're talking to somebody in person or on the phone, it's much more of a two-way interaction. And when it's written, it's very one-way. I didn't think of it that way because I thought they could write back, that it's two-way for me. But for the other person, it feels very much like I just gave you this novel and now you have to read it and you can't really respond in real time. So if it was ever something that was even mildly emotional, or if it was longer than 3 sentences, or if it was something that was going to require some back and forth, I learned to realize that I was going to need to go and find somebody or pick up the phone and call somebody.
So I'm going to rewind us all the way back to when Sarah was still in Vermont and had not made the decision yet to go to New York City. And we're just engaging back and forth and we're chatting, or once in a while, I was lucky enough, we would actually have a phone conversation. And as a new couple coming together, you have a lot to talk about as you're making life decisions on what you're doing after college and such. Well, at points, a phone conversation became pause. I'm going to send you an email because I have to put all my thoughts together.
Yeah.
And I have to understand that, which is very hard when I don't have the context of autism and traits and everything else. Sarah's not telling me everything because she means for me to read everything and know all of it. But it's the only way that you need to get those thoughts out.
Yeah.
And then it's subsection 3 of paragraph 4. That's what we really need to talk through. And all of the other stuff was either narrative to get to that point, or it's content that might be valuable based on what we get through on subsection 3, paragraph 4. And then we can go on and further along this relationship. Other than being captivated and appreciative of your honesty, I really struggled with that. We didn't have rat-a-tat back and forth conversation, but you did have a desire to be heard, even if it was in a written form, and your thoughts were salient and important and all of these great things. But that was a very interesting early manifestation of TLDR.
Too long, didn't read, yeah. And then the last thing, just to touch on when we're talking about when I was learning to navigate the workplace, is going back to what's the bigger picture, what's the purpose, right? So in my work now, I do a lot of donor meetings, and we'll go to, I'll meet people at a restaurant or for coffee or for something. And what I will do, based on experience, is I will look up the menu the day or two before at this restaurant, and I will pick out 2 or 3 things, just in case I don't have my first choice at that time, right? Because that happens ahead of time, so that when I get to the meeting, because the whole purpose of the meeting at the restaurant is not to eat the food, it's to meet the person and to have an interaction with the person, right? So if I'm spending 10 minutes, looking at the menu, I'm not meeting the person. And while the other person might be able to just find what they want quickly, I need time. So I'll take my 10 minutes the day before to look at what's there and pick what I'm going to pick. And then I'll pretend like a normal person, so that I can focus on what's most important, which is the interaction with the person and not the food that I'm going to eat. You would think going to a restaurant that the food is most important, but it's not. So taking that step back and thinking in my work situation, what's the most important thing? And once I have that in mind, then I can sort of circumvent all the other detailed things that I have to take care of because my brain works the way that it does in advance, or when I need to, so that I can focus on the most important.
And the other part of the pro tip, this is the 21 and older aspect of the pro tip. Know a couple of different drinks that you like. Do you like a Chardonnay? Do you want a sangria, a vodka seltzer? And it was a really great experience. Like for New York City, we're able to go out and go to the bars during happy hour and try different things so you could taste them.
Right.
But it's so that when you do go out, your coworker says, can we go out and have a drink or two? I want to talk about today, that project is crazy, whatever. Again, waitress comes over, the bartender comes over, and you're like, I'll have the Chardonnay. And then getting back to that conversation. And it's both to be more present in that conversation, and also so that you don't have the shield of the menu
Right.
and deflecting and not having the conversation, and they're going to go to the bathroom, and then you're going to pretend to get a phone call,
Right.
and then you made it to the bar.
You just described my first 10 years of social life.
I know, I've been there.
So you can go to the next slide, and that's sort of our takeaway points. Is if there's anything that you remember from what we've shared tonight, and it would be these 3 things, which is, and I always go back to this, remember the bigger picture, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because that'll take you out of, if you've gotten lost in the details, or if you're sort of stuck on something, go back to the purpose. Let perfection go. Like if it's 80% good, it's good enough. And especially I've had to do this with my children because my little ones do not allow me to be perfect. I cannot keep a perfect house. I cannot, keep myself perfect. Like they can't be perfect. So I've had to really work on being okay with things being good enough to keep moving. And then the last thing that we just talked about, which was to know some of your own go-tos, like so that you don't have to worry about those when you're in whatever situation you're in. Know if you need a certain sensory accommodation, know what food you might get at the restaurant where you're gonna go meet someone, know what drinks you might order, so that you don't have to spend time on those types of details, know what clothes you might want to wear to certain things. We used to, oh my gosh, I would have 3 different bags packed and ready. For different situations, my work bag, my kid's bag, and my going out bag. And each one would have each of the things that I would need in that situation, right? Because I don't want to have to spend an hour looking through and thinking about all the different things I would need for that situation. I want to be able to grab the bag and go. So stuff like that.
Reminds me of another project of clothing for quite a while. And I did it partially because it helped me, but I realized that the lessons helped you. Every week, I would lay out my 5 days in my closet. This is my tie with my shirt on this day. I have a meeting on Wednesday, and I do this naturally. I can wake up at 6:30, and at my 6:40, I've got my stuff
In the dark.
in the dark. Like one time I did put on the wrong shoes, one travel flag. So
You did do that.
I did that. No, I remember, and I had to go to the shoe store and give way too much money to show my problem. It was because I was getting up well before Sarah, and I didn't put the lights on. I mean, it wasn't just. But the lesson was unproject where you're trying to go, right? Know what clothing matches that. And it helps to plan ahead, even if it's the night before and looking at your schedule. That's wonderful. Another wonderful experience is how many times was I sitting in a waiting room while you were getting your new clothes, your new outfits, and figuring out how your clothing, your attire, your uniform was going to match where you are now and where you want to go next.
Mhm.
You always want to be pushing forward rather than being on your heels, because if you're on your heels, someone else is going to pass you by.
Mhm.
So there's that part too.
As my brain is trying to work out the metaphor and how to apply it to. So that's it. You can go to the next slide, and that has our contact information. If you, and we'll love to take questions. Wow, that was longer than I thought it was gonna.
Now I'm interested.
Yeah. Any questions that anybody has about anything or? Yeah.
So you said you work in the fundraising at Drexel. So I associate working in fundraising, and I'm with Michelle in advancement, as so awkward, because talking about money is awkward. So I wouldn't think of that as like something that might be easy to navigate. So how do you become comfortable with that?
Yeah, it is awkward sometimes, and I think that what I've learned was I'm in a position where if I'm talking to somebody about money, they know, they know who I am, they know what my job is, and they know ultimately where the conversation might be going. And I'm not going to ask anybody for money who isn't ready. So it really doesn't get awkward, because if I'm in a conversation with someone and, we're talking about their kid and their experience at Drexel, and they're frustrated about this and they want to know about this, like, they're not ready for a giving conversation yet. If I'm talking to them and they're like, oh, it would be great if you had X program, and couldn't we do this and this? Then I might be like, well, if we had X, we could do Y. And I can start to have that conversation around giving. So for me, it's not awkward, because I've learned where the steps are in the process.
I'm like, yeah, that process here.
Yeah.
And you invested very early on enjoying AF.
Yeah, learning,
And
lots of learning,
lots of learning, right?
Yeah.
This isn't something you went to school for.
right?
And you really invested in becoming an expert at the low level components, and you were successful at them. So you didn't fall forward and grow in your career quickly because you were successful. But you did have that underlying training so that it made sense.
Yeah, I needed the training, because I'm not a person who can just wing it. I have to fake it till you make it. I needed to read a lot of books on major giving and fundraising and how you do X, Y, and Z. And it's really not something that you can learn completely from books. So it was sort of this togetherness of books and experience, and having Larry to help marry the two together that helped.
Yes, from what?
So from online, there are two questions. The first is from Lauren. Is there a good time to discuss your thinking process behind a conversation compared to a neurotypical person?
I love that question.
Yeah.
Sarah, this is not the time for us to talk about that. We need to break for a few minutes.
Yeah.
That was a early and often conversation of when is it appropriate? And sometimes conversations have to happen when they have to happen. But learning when you can park something. I talk about journaling and task lists and maybe even having a moment to really assess the context behind the question is super valuable, right?
Yeah. So there's two parts to that. And because for me, with my executive functioning, if I don't say what I just thought of right then, I'm going to forget it. And sometimes it's important. So often what I will do is now, like, I'll have my phone and I'll jot a quick note, like talk to X person about why, so that I have that. Or I might sometimes, my brain will remember random strings of numbers for no reason, and I don't like even know why. But so I've developed a system where if I have something that I really need to remember and I can't write it down because I have a 3-year-old or whatever, I'll assign a number to it. It has to be like a 4-digit number that's random, and then I will remember the number before I remember whatever the thing is that I needed to do. So if I need to talk to Larry about something and I can't put it in my calendar or make a note, I'll put a number on it, and then at the end of the day, I'll review my numbers and I'll remember what it was that I needed to do. Find, not all brains will do that. Maybe it's a picture, maybe it's my son. Cyrus just told me the story that he remembered my father's name is Ray. Yeah, he only heard it once, and it was 2 years ago, by assigning his subject, assigning it to a picture of a Star Trek person with a lightsaber, because that was a Ray, right? So he did it by himself, like assigning a picture to remember, right? And then the other part of that question was talking about my thought process behind a conversation. So it depends on the conversation. If it's a small talk conversation, which I hate, and which a lot of people hate, I have certain topics sort of in my back pocket that I've cultivated that I can talk about. I can talk about my kids. Kids I can talk about all day, every day. If the person I'm small talking with has kids, great, we can go on forever. I can't talk about sports. I know nothing about sports. I can only do the weather for like 2 seconds. So have some topics in your back pocket that are not super specific. Like not everybody wants to talk about Harry Potter or Star Trek, right? But they'll talk about kids. They'll talk about what's good to do in Philadelphia. They'll talk about restaurants, TV shows. Have some of those topics that are good for you in the back of your pocket, right? If it's a conversation about a specific thing, I have to be very active in going back to the bigger picture, right? Why are we having this conversation? What's the point? What are we trying to get to? What does this person want from me? So that I can keep on track. And the other thing too about a conversation with someone is that it's always a two-way street. So I could end up very often talking too much, or usually for me, not talking enough. And the other person will just keep going on and on. But if I think of making a conversation with someone like almost like making a sandwich together, right? If I make the whole sandwich, then they didn't contribute anything. But if I put a piece of bread down and then I wait and let them put the meat on, and then they wait, and then I put the cheese on, think of it like a back and forth making a sandwich kind of. That's what I do sometimes.
And I know this answer is going very long for one question, but something we need to include next time earlier in the slide deck. You have 0 short-term memory.
Yeah.
0. 5 minutes, it's gone. 2 weeks, it'll come back.
Right.
So depending on the importance of that conversation, also defines what the value is of writing it down, taking the crib notes so that you don't forget about it. Or you say, look, I have to have this conversation because it is this important. If I don't select which college I'm going to by 5 p.m. today, I can't go to any college. So finding that value system, but that trait of memory, if you have memory challenges as part of your personality, then even more so, finding ways to stay present with the knowledge is super important. And I believe there was one other question.
The other question from online is Jamie, wondering if Sarah can speak to the sensory piece and how that has impacted her as a parent and how it impacted her awareness of being autistic.
Yeah. So lab choices have always been a real issue for me. New York City was ridiculous. I would, I'd go around with headphones and everything. And, but I have discovered with my children that I have fewer sensory needs than they do. And they're much more sensitive, both of them, to noises and light. These lights are, I'm about done with these lights. But for me, as a parent, it's really tough because your kids want to be on you and they're loud and they're messy. Both of them know now that I do not do well with them. It's so funny.
Can I touch your face, Mom? Mom, can I touch your face?
Oh, it's fine, please.
You're not alone.
So like even my 3-year-old, she'll look at me and she'll be like, I mean that. She's got this look on her face, like, don't get mad. Mommy doesn't like that. So you sort of find your stride, right? Like I'm honest with my kids, if I need some space, and they're usually able to give it to me, not always, but, or I might turn to Larry and say, I need 5 minutes, and I would go sequester myself in a room, with the lights off.
Don't be afraid to advocate for
Yeah.
just your own well-being.
Yeah. Or he'll look at me sometimes and be like, go upstairs. Because, I'm like bedraggled. But so finding those moments where if I find, especially if I know that I have an endpoint, if I'm like overloaded with my kids, but I know that I only need to do this for another half an hour and then I can go upstairs, that helps me a lot because then I can push through to knowing when. So that's where often I'm asking Larry, what's the schedule? When are we doing X? So that I can, so that I can try and find some semblance of, okay, just have to push and then I can get to this point and then I can do some self-care, especially with kids. It's tough. It's tough for everybody, not just autistic parents.
You had a question?
Yeah, but I've got 3 questions, so you want to go? Like
We love the question part.
Go first. Yeah, okay, that was 3. So, I want to be really clear. I'm not autistic. I'm in HR, I'm really super social, which is contrary to my human. And so I'm going to ask questions based on conversations that we've had. You can make any corrections that you want, but I'm asking because I don't understand and I want to be a better supporter of experiences that she's having. And I mentioned my career and I mentioned the fact that I'm social because it means that I needed to go into problem solving mode.
Yeah.
And that's not what she needs, but that's my career. And I'm social, which means I'm already figuring all that how we're going to navigate. So the question I have, and then we'll share. The one I have is, she and I have had conversations about how it is that if someone is genuinely your friend. So I have literally no ability to be able to answer a question like that, except to say, nobody really knows. You get bumps and bruises, but as you shared, ambiguity is not a reasonable answer. So
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts to how I can support maybe what she can learn?
Yeah, so friendship, I don't have a lot of friends and I'm okay with that. Because it's effort. It is a whole lot of effort to keep up a friendship. And if you want to then go for it. What I would say is that if if you're in a relationship with someone, any type of relationship, friendship, and you don't feel like yourself, or if you feel like they are putting you down, or if they're trying to change you, then that's a boundary, right?
Take advantage of you.
Take advantage of you. So many people, I'm very naive and trusting. And so I've had to be very difficult, because people will take advantage if they can. And if they're really a genuine friend, they won't take advantage of you. So knowing where your boundary is as a person, like, I won't do certain things, or I won't think of myself in a certain way. And if someone is asking me to do that, or they're making me feel a certain way, then that's the boundary I have to hold. That's been helpful for me. I think oftentimes, I think of people as machines almost, like my friend is my friend and that's it, right? We're always going to be friends. Not the case, right? Like friendships and people change and shift, and you might have a fight and you might not, and you might disagree, and it's okay. All of that is great. Conflict is fine. It's when it starts to overstep the boundary of who you are as a person that I think, I would start to draw the line.
I have 2 cents,
Yeah,
and that is reciprocating value. So D&D friends, well, we get together every Saturday. Is everyone bringing something to the table? Is everyone enjoying themselves? Okay, that pod, that served you very well
Yeah.
in high school. What didn't serve you well was the social dynamics and your friendships from when you were 10 and 11, then they turned to teenagers and what they were trying to accomplish. Well, Sarah had a car. Provide needs that weren't reciprocated with that friendship. So evolution is evolution, and friends come and go. We've all experienced this. But finding some happiness in the friends that you do have, and I think you've gotten better at knowing yourself now and going through this process with your diagnosis of finding friends that understand you, understand why you don't respond to a text for 2 weeks,
Right.
Why you don't say goodbye ever to Lindsay, you just always walk out the door, but she understands you, and there's reciprocating value in that friendship.
Yeah, finding people who will understand and not try and change. Like Lindsay doesn't ever come to me and say, "Why don't you ever say goodbye to me?" She'll quip with Larry a little bit because it's an outlet, but finding that balance of, and it's not going to be a lot. Like I'm honest when I say I have very few friends. I have one person that I'm still in touch with from college, and he's probably also autistic. And we touch base like every 6 months, and I would still consider him one of my closest friends. I could go to him with anything, and he would be here in a second if I needed him. So knowing that has been really helpful. Like I don't have to have a lot of friends to feel fulfilled.
You're welcome to go.
Well, I'll go because it's kind of coordinated a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm reminded as you guys are talking that the world doesn't help autistic people. It's, autistic people have to adapt to the world. And what's really beautiful about your marriage is that you do adapt to each other and you do help each other. And that's so amazing and fortunate for both of you. I wonder how much you share your diagnosis in your workplace, so people do understand you, or how much that's shared, or are you always like figuring out what to do on your own, or as a couple, how do I handle this so I,
It's a huge question. Great second to think about it. Situationally, the label not only carries weight, but it carries different weight with different people in different situations. And assuredly, unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. But I guess this is to tee you up. you know yourself now,
Mhm.
and you have put yourself in positions where you can be honest about who you are. And that was a transition, that was a progressive experience.
Right, right, and there's this balance between, like, you don't necessarily always have to go all the way to, I'm autistic, right? You can say, I might not respond to your text right away. Or, different like traits that you can point to, if it helps in the relationship. For me, I'm very fortunate to be in a position where my work is in autism. So I can be very open, and I'm in a workplace. Drexel is very accepting, and I'm starting a colleague resource group for neurodivergent coworkers. And so it's a very open space, and I'm able to be, and it helps my job to be open about my diagnosis, because then I can relate with parents and I can relate with students. But it's not going to work like that in every workplace. And so what I would say is it really depends on the situation. And I would start first with traits, needs, like if you need a dimmer for the light in your office, or if you need a table light.
Bookie hats.
I wore a visor to work for a while before I came to Drexel, because the overhead light in my office was like this. And I'd be sitting at my desk all day getting a headache. So I put a visor on, and people might comment, like somebody came in and said, you look like a poker player. I'm like, okay, whatever. Don't need to tell you anything. So navigate a little bit, like, do you really need to go all the way to the diagnosis? If so, do it. Some people, like, you really need certain accommodations, and an HR department might need that. Or you might just want to be open about it, and that's great. But in some situations, you could just go with the certain needs that you have, or the certain traits that you have, and that could be enough in a relationship or in a workplace.
It's a great question. It's an hour presentation of
Yeah.
this, 10 hours of.
I guess it does speak volumes, but it still is a diagnosis that there would be some reluctance.
Yeah.
To share.
Well, like a lot of things, we are a people of many generations.
Yeah.
And generations that don't know what the term autism means, those that know what it means to their understanding and information 50 years ago, those from even 10 years ago, when we had the great divide of Asperger's. And we still have a quadrant of people that consider themselves as Asperger, not autistic. And then they go to the doctor, like, well, that doesn't exist anymore. And now I'm not even going to give you the autism label. And so they're left without an identity of a label that at least they had prior. So situations, I don't want to go with this as another answer right now, so I want to talk through things. But I will say, we have found that understanding that in your support group, so I'm now speaking as if I was you for a moment, having a therapist who you can talk through things reflectively, having a coach where you're able to talk through things constructively and going forward, having an advocate. Maybe it's one person that handles all three, maybe it's 3 different people, maybe it's 5 people, depending on your situations. But having someone to help with a second set of eyes to approach what the dilemma is, I think would be the short answer of finding the path forward. Tag.
I know, we're a good sandwich, because that was one of my questions. So my last question is, I've experienced with my Anna that if something gets like super messy, like we're talking like, right, the noises to me to say if like there's messy, like, no, like physical mess, like physical mess in a room or like working on something, like we're talking that. So with a mess, it'll get so overwhelming that the response that oftentimes I'll get from her is, it's too much to even get started, I'm not gonna get started. And I talk a lot about, well, just look at one thing
Yeah.
and just do that. But the problem is, different from you, I guess, she does, or maybe it's the same, she does. My experience with her is that she does both big picture and does small, so in certain areas, like when she's looking at a room, she's looking at the whole room, the whole mess. Whereas I'm looking at one thing, and I'm like, just tackle this only for everything else, because I can't, whereas in other scenarios, she's literally looking only at the granular, and I'm like, good lord, look at all it, right, there's beauty. Right, so if you have any thoughts about, and then you can listen, but if you have any thoughts about maybe as a parent, how, what would be the better way to actually like support that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're talking about like a messy house.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, for sure, which is still a problem. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like the big picture versus the details. It's hard for me to know where I'm supposed to be there. So sometimes I might be too big picture.
Right.
Or, often I'm more in the details, but, and it's also this sort of black or white thing, right? It's either messy or it's not. I either do the whole thing or not at all, right? If I'm only doing one little corner, like,
Why bother?
why bother? The
Yeah,
whole room
she's
is
not in
still
your
messy.
head, that's the thing.
So, and for me, it took, Larry bought me a book. I haven't read the whole thing. It was like a book on tidying up, like literally someone sat down and wrote a book about how you dust, how you keep the floor clean, how you, like, all of the things that like people used to be taught that we're not taught anymore.
To home ec.
That I never learned, but I just figured, like, you clean up, okay, you're done. But sometimes that doesn't happen. You don't have time to clean up. The mess gets ridiculous and it gets to the point where it's overwhelming. So I had to actually read it in a book and learn the steps. I still don't do all of them, but I'm working on it. Of being able to do that chunking, right? Like I'm the type of learner, and you can find what learning style works for you. Like my mom would tell me the same thing, like just do your desk, or just, and it wouldn't work for me because I needed to read it in a book. I needed somebody to tell me, these are the steps,
And taught a skill that some feel come naturally.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come, very few things come naturally to
Right.
you. Everything comes from informational sources that you trust, and not every informed source can be your parents.
Yeah.
Finding or your spouse.
Right.
That's why I bought the book. It's not that I was hoping that I was gonna walk around with white luck.
It was funny. We're like, some women would be mad at me for buying them a book like this. But I know you won't. Because I found it very helpful. And it like little things like steps for how to make the bed, and like steps for like do the dusting first before the vacuuming, right? Because dust is gonna get on the, like all these little, it's like cooking, steps that I had to sort of learn. And I had to do it that way, and it's still hard for me. I think the other thing too is going back to my bigger picture. Do I want to live in this mess? And if I'm okay living in the mess right now, fine. But I will get to a point where I'm not okay with it anymore, and it's interfering with my mental health. It's making me feel crazy every time I walk in this room. And so then I go back to that bigger picture of I just need to figure out how I can make it part of like my mental health process, right? I will feel better when all of this is done, and I don't have to do it all at once because it's impossible. And I've had to really, that's something that took years to learn, and I'm still working on
And
it.
this is when we disclose you are in your 30s now.
Yeah.
So this is an evolution, right? This is not a revolution.
Yeah. I think having kids helps, honestly, because now I really can't do everything all at once. I have to chunk it.
And they have their messes that they bring
And,
to
yeah.
our house.
Right.
I want to add, I think we touched on the end is really important, and that is, what's the reward? Well, you've gotten to a point where there is a mental health reward.
Yeah.
There's also the,
Oh.
yes.
Yes, another thing too, I would do is, and I do this for working out also, because I hate working out. I take an audiobook. I love books. I love to read. I'm only allowed to listen to it while I'm doing the thing that I don't want to do, cleaning or working out. Right, so then I have a huge motivator, I gotta get to that next chapter in that book, I gotta clean something.
You
so that I-
haven't read Harry Potter for the 9th time.
Oh my God, 29th time? Yeah.
I want to also add that the value system, having a clean desk, right, what your mom was saying, example, you're doing your schoolwork every day. How do you find anything in this mess? And as much as you might want to say, well, I can find it, no, you can't find it in your mess. It is just a mess. And then you're going to reset it and then recreate the message and go through your day. But finding the value system of what should be clean, the laundry example, well, do you go off and buy another set of socks? Or now do I have to do that? Do you constrain yourself on how many plates you have because you're living on your own?
Yeah.
And if we had 20 plates, then we would have 20 dirty plates. So
Only have
we now have a value where we have enough plates and things in the kitchen that go in the dishwasher, and then they have to be washed. Sans coffee cups, we way too many
Way
coffee
too many.
cups because everybody has way too many coffee cups. But finding that value system and finding what that natural tension is of what needs to be done from the person's perspective that's living the experience. And finding that contrast with the value of the person that is presenting the problem. It is their home, it is their work cycle. You're sharing an office. What is that? And it's going to be an evolution. It's going to be evolving. But you want your people in your life to be happy and successful and have a positive rapport with you. So when you believe that it comes from yourself, you're going to find the motivation to start going down that path and figuring out those traits and tools to be successful.
That's your bigger picture. There you go, yeah.
It's like we wrote that up.
Yeah. Who's the name of the book? It's
No.
oh, that,
That book, yeah.
I think it was literally like the art of tidying up.
I'm reading.
I know.
No.
Older than that.
Which, by the way, she no longer holds
I thought,
as a big.
she had kids,
Oh, no.
and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa.
You're like,
Can't do that.
Congratulations, welcome to the real. world.
Welcome to parenthood, where you cannot have a big house. You can't, but like for a minute.
No, my thought was just that because my kids share my diagnosis, how do I teach them the things that I don't understand? And thankfully, you already found the book. So
If you hit us up, we will find it in our book selection. We'll make sure you get the name.
that's awesome. Like, how do you teach them how to take a shower? You just do it. And then like, I don't know.
Then three different thing. Sarah, you had a tough day. You wanted to take a shower. It makes you feel better.
God, that was years we were trying to fit this, because the showering makes him feel refreshed. It kills me, I hate it. I have to, I have to listen to an audiobook while I'm in the shower, so that I'm distracted. Right, audiobook or music or something. Yeah, that's interesting. Or you'd ask me like, how was your shower? And I was like, torture.
I don't need it. We have.
I-
Yeah, this
Good question. How old were you when you got pregnant and what prompted you to get those started?
So I was 31 and my son was like 2.5-ish. And what prompted it was the first year of being a mom. And suddenly, like I was a mom, I was a wife, I was a career professional, and I couldn't do all of that and get by the way that I had in school and even through career and being married. Like that started a little bit of our communication struggles when we were just early on as a couple. But add a kid in there and suddenly like I can barely take care of myself anymore. So becoming a parent was the tipping point for me, where it really became clear that I needed to know more about what was going on with myself and why I couldn't remember certain things or why I couldn't take care of myself in certain ways. And it was like a year-long process of us debating whether we even wanted to go for the diagnosis, because I didn't want it to change things in a bad way. Like I wanted it to help us, but I didn't want to start using it as a crutch, right? Like, oh, I'm autistic, I can't do that. And I didn't want it to change the way that Larry thought of me, right? We'd already spent, at that point, when Cyrus was born, we'd been together for at least 5 years, 3 to 5 years. And I didn't want it to change the way that we worked well together. But after a year of really talking that through off and on together, we decided that we wouldn't let it change things, and I wouldn't use it as a crutch, which I've really tried not to. And we went for it, and it really did help. It actually, it's funny because then Cyrus got his diagnosis, their son, like the next year. And usually it happens the other way around with adults, where like your kid gets the diagnosis and then you're like, wait a minute, right? That sounds a lot like me when I was that age. But for me, it was the other way around. Does that answer your whole question? I can't remember. Yeah.
So Larry, did you teach yourself like how to help Sarah? Like, did you try to educate yourself about autism?
Great question. I had the fortunate life experience of, I'm a technologist, and I'm old enough that when I learned computers, there were no classes to learn computers. And then I started running projects and working with multinational groups and different high context and low context communicators and people whose English is a fourth option on a Tuesday only. And finding ways to communicate what the reason was to be successful gave me a huge leg up in wanting to have a successful partnership. Sans a label, just I want this time to find ways to be successful, and it requires understanding and conversation. So as we in creativity, a lot of creativity, finding the label and the textbooks behind the label of autism and the trait identification, and really understanding that certain traits for ADHD and for autism, these traits, right? The knowledge just empowers us that, okay, this is something. And by the way, by a psychologist, I am neurotypical, but I am eclectic. I have a very and challenging way that I experience the world, but it's because I value to such a degree the conversation, that communication. And thank you for Starbucks Penn Station on a February cold day, because without that, this wouldn't have had a spark. Yeah, that Starbucks unfortunately no longer exists in Penn Station. I took Cyrus back recently and it's all tore up. It's like, well, I'm going to show you the line and then the table where we sat and all of this started. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I do aware that we have been here for a long time and I'm very thankful for all of this attention.
Everybody online said thanks.
Thank you, everybody online. And again, thank you to everybody that is here. We really appreciate it, especially this part of the conversation where it becomes a Q&A, and where I share that we're trying to come up with this second book, really talking about parenting our children. And we're in a room where you all have been doing it for a decade longer than we have, and all of your experiences got to just be so powerful. So thank you for giving us a chance to share, the 20-something version of Sarah and where we come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.